Apple moving production to India. Apple could make most of its iPhones sold in the United States in factories in India by the end of next year and is speeding up those plans to navigate potentially higher tariffs in China, according to a Reuters report. Apple is holding urgent talks with contract manufacturers like Foxconn and Tata to achieve that goal, Reuters said, adding that Apple sells over 60 million iPhones in the United States annually, with roughly 80% of them made in China currently. The Reuters report said that manufacturing costs in India, however, are about 5 to 8% higher than in China, with the difference rising as much as 10% in some cases. I reached out to Neil Shah, Vice President, Research and co-founder of Counterpoint Research, and I began by asking him how he was seeing these new potential investments, the competitive advantages for iPhone to bring those manufacturing, and what were the nuances within that.
Obviously, Apple has not officially come out and said that, right? It's still an estimate or a grapevine happening, going down in the supply chain. But obviously, the essence of it is there is a bigger opportunity for India from manufacturing point of view, and Apple's diversification strategy of China Plus One, which we have been talking about for almost a couple of years now. So if you look at the overall demand for iPhones in China, in US, right? Almost like 60 to 65 million per year is a market. As you rightly said, 20% are coming out of India, which is increased, right, over the last 2 years. Obviously, India has more capacity to produce even more because India is also shipping not only to US, but exporting to other countries, the iPhones, right? So there are major suppliers like Foxconn, Tata, and then Tata also taking up Pegatron and Wistron facilities, right? Enough capacity to produce more phones, and obviously the new factories coming up for Foxconn in Karnataka and also for Tata in Tamil Nadu, right? So based on that, there is enough pipeline being planned anyways for this diversification. The only caveat being, until last year, most of the phones which were produced in India, right, the mix of the model, it was mostly the N-1, N-2 generation and the base models which were being manufactured right off the bat. And those were being mostly shipped. But starting last year, Apple started also manufacturing through their partners the Pro and Pro Max models, right? I think you reported about it. That started manufacturing just after the launch, which usually used to be like 5 to 6 months gap between the Pro Max and the base. So, which is good news. However, still, we don't have enough capacity and expertise to manufacture more advanced iPhones, because these iPhones are the pinnacle of iPhone's portfolio, and they have more advanced parts, and which requires more sophistication in terms of manufacturing those. Once we build up that capacity and expertise, so obviously Foxconn does most of those Pro models, right? And Tata will build up the capability and capacity moving forward. So once we do that, then we are in a good shape to take up as much as production for US market, because US market is more of a Pro Max market. Most of the phones, majority of the phones are sold there at Pro Max. And obviously there are base versions which are sold for prepaid markets in US and for N-1, N-2 generation prepaid market. But the majority is the postpaid market and dominated by Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and those are all more mature iPhone users which are on Pro or Pro Max and buying the best iPhones out there. So that is the bottleneck which I see. There is enough capacity we can build up in manufacturing and exporting, but how going to be the model mix? Who is going to manufacture that? Because the biggest caveat also is not just Pro mix, but also the mix of suppliers, right? Mix of EMS partners. So if you look at in China, Luxshare, right, has entered Apple's supply chain in last few years. Luxshare started with airports, but now it's also manufacturing iPhones, right? It has taken a good chunk of share from Wistron, Pegatron, and Foxconn. And that's why you see Wistron and Pegatron moving out of the Apple supply chain everywhere, in iPhones at least. So Luxshare is not coming to India anytime soon, right? So what happens to that big chunk of phones which are manufactured by Luxshare, and who does it go to? Does it go to Foxconn or Tata, right? And who has the capability as well as cost competitiveness to match Luxshare, which is the Chinese. So these are 2 or 3 caveats, right, which ironed out, then India can take up most of the US imports coming from India, right? Until then, it's going to be, our estimate is, it was 20% last year. This year, for the first half, it could be close to 30%, right? Because of this tariff situation accelerating a little bit.
But that's a big jump.
Big jump because of this production which happened in March end, right? Which Apple shipped to US.
Yeah, it was like front loaded. Yeah.
But I'm not surprised in a sense where, because last year, since we tracked this very detailed, right, from chip to channel. So last year there was few quarters when export contribution to overall iPhone sales or shipments in a particular quarter reached 35% in US. So it's not there, but all for the full year, because the Q4 is a higher holiday season in US and it has more mix of Pro and Pro Max. That's why on an average it's 20% for the full year. But it doesn't, we do have capability to spike to 35%. So 30 to 35% ideally should not be a surprise, but it's a big jump for sure on an average for a quarter.
Right. So you're saying that while opportunity is there, we still have to build at scale the skill sets to produce more iPhone Pros and iPhone Pro Maxes, which are mostly being produced in China right now. So let me add another question to that, Neil. So one of the points that came up was the cost difference and the fact that it could cost about 10% more to produce in India at this point. So how are you seeing costs and the competitive advantage if we were to put the tariff thing aside for a moment?
So from base cost, I would say obviously India is quite cost competitive when it comes to labor, which is not a new news, right? So from labor perspective, we are cheaper than China. The only thing is the overheads, right? Building an ecosystem around it. Right now, everything is, all the different parts are being imported, right? We don't have a supplier ecosystem around Foxconn or around Tata, right? We are still getting there. Tata is manufacturing some casing, right? So that can alleviate some cost, but there are still many components which are still shipped to India. Whereas China, not everything is shipped to China. There are a lot of components which are still manufactured in China around the Foxconn factories, right? And the due diligence which is done from the quality control and everything, right? And the scale of it, which gives them more overall cost competitiveness, right? Obviously, eventually we'll reach there at some point when we have that ecosystem, which I said is a caveat in the earlier point.
Today, for example, if you were to take one iPhone, how much of it are we importing today, assembling and then re-exporting? I know these figures have come out in the past, but maybe worth revisiting versus China.
So it's 16% of the global production is contributed by India.
The India value add is 84%.
So, for example, total 220 million iPhones are sold a year, right? So 16% of iPhones are produced in India, right? So producing 16% of iPhones in India, we are importing most of the parts, right? The value add, if you talk in terms of value add to the overall bill of materials of an iPhone, that is single digit at this point. It's mostly plastic parts, casing, accessories, box, cables, and so forth. The majority of the cost comes from chip, memory, display, camera. Everything is imported, right? We are just putting it together. Obviously, there's a duty on camera module, right? So we are still not sophisticated enough to assemble at CKD level a camera module, right? Getting sensor from Sony. So we don't have LG Inotech, right? Factory in India. LG Inotech is one of the big module manufacturers, right? So LG Inotech has to come here to set up that shop, imports sensors, Sony sensors, which are manufactured at TSMC, right, in Taiwan, then bring all the different lenses, put together in a clean room, everything. Then the value add will increase, right? And also some parts, if we can source from India, like for display module, right? If we can build the entire, we can fab the entire display here, but we are not fabbing any display. We are just building the modules in India, right? But not for Apple still.
Last question. So between Tata's and Foxconn or Taiwanese company versus, let's say, the Indian company, where do you see the progression for Indian companies in the value add chain?
That's a good question. I think Tata is very well positioned. It's more horizontally integrated compared to Foxconn. So Tata owns every piece of horizontal supply chain which Apple is interested in, right? From now fabs, though it's mature node fabs, imagine a particular small mature node IC or a component which goes into an iPhone, iPad, or can be eventually manufactured in a fab at a Tata. Then it can do memory packaging also, which can go to an iPhone or an iPad or a MacBook. then it can manufacture all the other components around iPhone, the casing, eventually maybe they assemble a display or camera module, and then produce the entire iPhone, and then also sell that iPhone at the Chroma store, right? And also, if required, they can also contribute with software, with TCS, and also integration with a car with Tata Motors, right? So Tata is very well positioned